Did you just turn it on? Yeah, you better turn it on the whole time. I have no idea what it is. I've been waiting for it. Mark didn't bring it in.
How did she shut this off?
Gotta get a picture of the back arch. California, he's on his back. He's studying something.
Here with Coach Eichelberger, representing Coach Maury Eichelberger from the 1921-22 team is Fred Eichelberger, his nephew. He's right behind me here. Coach Eichelberger guided the Cardinals in the Loyola games to a win and a tie. Maury died at age 77 in 1970 and spent many years as an official in football and baseball. He was quoted as a walking rule book. He started at City College in the 1900s and coached there too, as did Coach George Young. After City, he played football at Cornell, owned a small farm. He was a bachelor, so Coach Eichelberger's closest relative is his nephew. Fred, on behalf of Calvert Hall, we would like you to accept this plaque for your uncle's service to Calvert Hall from Tom Bates. This is the plaque that we're giving out. Calvert Hall College Alumni Honors Maury Eichelberger Thanksgiving Football Classic, and all the coaches' names are on the individual plaque. All right, representing Coach Valentine, Dutch Lentz is Dutch's son, Val Jr. Val, if you can head up here to the podium. Val is a 1941 St. Joe grad. Dutch Lentz coached 1923 to 1929. Our 29 yearbook said that for the past 5 years, Dutch has been turning out athletic teams at Calvert Hall that have been on par with any in the state. A hard, aggressive fighter, sterling qualities as a leader and a gentleman. Dutch died at age 83 on May of 19th of 1980. I really want to appreciate your attention, please. There's been a lot of effort put into this for tonight. Can we have some silence, please?
Quiet!
Thank you. Dutch was the last athletic director at St. John's College before he dropped intercollegiate athletics and then became the assistant AD at West Point until 1942. But his most noted record was 59 straight basketball victories that will never be equaled. Val, on behalf of Calvert Hall, we wish to extend our thanks to your dad and hope this plaque will commemorate that. Representing Coach Ray Barr, who coached from 1935 to 1946. Ron Barr, one of 5 sons. Please head this way. 4 of which went to Calvert Hall. Coach Barr died July of 1966. He's buried in Philadelphia. He lettered in 4 sports and was selected to the LaSalle College Hall of Fame. Coach Barr won the MSA Basketball Championship in 1939, and his first 4 football games against Loyola were victories. At the end of his coaching career at Calvert Hall, the yearbook wrote of Coach, untiring in his efforts, never discouraged, and always body and soul behind the teams. He turned out some mighty fine athletes. We admire and respect him more for the lessons that he has taught his players. Ron, on behalf of your dad and brothers who went to Calvert Hall, please accept this award as a token of our gratitude for Coach Ray Barr. The next coach presents an interesting circumstance. Would Mr. Jim McGirt please come forward? Jim is a 1962 Cardinal graduate, the year I started there. In the Thanksgiving game of 1940, head coach Ray Barr was already hospitalized for cancer treatment, and Jim's dad, Jim McGirt, became the only assistant coach to become head coach for the Loyola game. Coach McGurk won both of his games as head coach, first beating Mount St. Joe and then Loyola in 1940 by a score of 6-2. He was a star and a captain when he played at Calvert Hall. He came back to coach both football and ice hockey. Jim's wife writes to us that up until the time that Jim died on September the 2nd, 1992, Jim always treasured his association with Calvert Hall. To him, the Christian brothers were tops. I too have had a great love for Calvert Hall. Jim McGurk Jr., please accept this gift as thanks and remembrance for your dad's contribution to Calvert Hall. Calvert Hall is proud to announce that this fall, 5 MIAA champions. JV cross country undefeated, the varsity cross country undefeated, the JV soccer champs, also the varsity soccer champs, and the JV football team undefeated champs. This year's 75th anniversary game button and patch was designed by Mel Filler. The graphic design for the football program cover was donated by Ken Hatter. Here tonight we have some interesting people out in the audience. We have head football coach at Towson State, Gordy Combs, his Calvert Hall assistants Pat Kern and Jay Robbins. I want to stand up please and recognize. Gordy Combs went to Calvert Hall, of course. Also, would like to recognize from the administration staff of Calvert Hall, Brother Kevin Strong, the president, who's right over here. Also, Brother William Johnson, the principal. Lou Heydrich, the assistant principal. Lou, stand up. Get up. As good as when I was there. You still look the same way. You look like you've aged a day. You're new or George right next to you. Former principals, Brother Gabriel Sicilian from the 1950s. Where he is. Also, Brother Renee Sterner from the 1980s. With us tonight to represent the Sun Papers, Jim Henneman, one of the best baseball writers around. Where's Jim Henneman? Here? Haven't seen. Where's Jimmy? Not here, okay. The three who travel the longest distance for tonight's event, Jerry Dashiell from Oklahoma City. Please stand up. Hey! Not here? Oh, okay. Also, Jim Welsh from Florida. And Jeff Keel from Ohio. Arizona who? Bobby Fitzgibbon? Fitzsimmons, excuse me, from Phoenix, Arizona? Okay, Bobby Fitzsimmons, a little bit longer distance. Also, NFL Hall of Famer, the greatest quarterback in the history of the National Football League, John Unitas is there. Can you have back-to-back nights so interesting? Last night they had the Sports Pushers Banquet over at Martin's West. They honored about a dozen Orioles, and the last to come up to the podium was Brooks Robinson, and he also got a standing ovation. Brooks Robinson and John Unitas, two of the people that we all love here and adore as youngsters growing up here in Baltimore. Also here tonight, John LeBrew, 4 touchdowns in the 1942 game. John, stand up please. And also Brother Randy, been in Calvert Hall since 1947. For the next segment, let's turn it over to Vince.
That last guy he introduced, Tom introduced, this was long before Tom was born, and he didn't get the kind of hand I think he deserved. I think it was the greatest performance I ever saw in a Calvert Hall Loyola game, and I figured out tonight I've seen about 48 of those games. Johnny LeBrew from 1942 for Calvert Hall. 4 touchdowns. And the amazing thing, everyone was from 40 yards or more, great distances. They won the game, and that was a great, tremendous performance. Some of the people that came from great distances now, from 19 to 48 team, or the class of 48 in Loyola, from Stratham, New Hampshire, Felix McGuigan, right over here. Felix McGuigan. Felix and all those guys on that team, all together at the table. Tim Perrin, Bob Cahill, and Bill Finch, and where's Shabdak? And then Jimmy Garland and Jack Lawrence and all these fellows, Pickett Reel, Father Proctor and Connie Budell, and it's terrific to see you guys. Bob Fitzsimmons was introduced from Scottsdale, Arizona. He came in, he's the 52 and 53 teams, some of Ed Hargan's last team. Bob Fitzsimmons. And from Virginia Beach, Florida, one of the great halfbacks in the history of the Calvert Hall Loyola Series. From 1962 class at Loyola, Henry Blaha. Henry. Too much. A couple of former Jesuit players, Jesuits who became Jesuits after they played football. From the 1945 class, and a quarterback on the 44 championship team, Father Henry Haskey, Hank Haskey. And as I mentioned before, from the 45 and 16, Father Bert Proctor, over here, right there. The oldest Loyola alumnus here tonight, class of 1924. Now remember, this is the year that Granville Rice named Notre Dame's 4 horsemen. So he's seen a few players in his day. Mr. Joe Jankowitz. Joe, right here. Well, Joe still has more hair than anybody at the head table. Way to go. We also have from the class of 26, Francis Babe Suter, Mr. Suter. And from 28, John Atkinson right here. And this fellow's an alumnus of the class of 1933, but in the 1994 alumni lacrosse game, he actually faced off. From the class of 33, John Nom. John Nom. And some members of the faculty here tonight, a fellow who played high school basketball at Xavier up in New York against Loyola. He played at the old Knights of Columbus, the Alcazar, when they had a place there. The former president of Loyola High, Father Jim Salmon. Father Salmon. Favorites for many, many years, the chaplain with the Baltimore Colts, Father Joe McNamara. Father McNamara. And from the classical languages department, Father Lord George. Another former headmaster at the at Loyola High, and a great hockey player. And he played hockey until about 3 years ago. From the class of 43, Father Don Renford. He's also had 4 holes in one while playing golf. The head of the middle school, class of 60, Tim Pierce. Tim Pierce. And the assistant assistant headmaster, former longtime assistant Joe Burns, and the former coach of the famed Baltimore Thunder indoor lacrosse team, class of 60, Johnny Stewart. Calvert Hall guys are probably saying, did he miss anybody? All right. Okay. Now we're going to introduce a couple of people who represent coaches no longer with us. Representing Coach Joe Melendek. Joe Melendek played football at Loyola High. He went on to Georgetown, was an outstanding player there. And of course, a lot of people who can remember the Orioles when they won the pennant in 1944 know that Bill Dyer, who was the predecessor to Chuck Thompson, named him the Loyola Limited. Joe Melendek. He came back to coach Calvert Hall for 3 years, and in 1948 was the architect of perhaps the biggest upset up to that time in the series. Thinking back, I'm not sure how good an upset it was because Calvert Hall had some great players on the club. But Loyola was heavily favored. Calvert Hall won the game, however, 13-0. He was the all-time center fielder at Loyola High on George Helfrich's all-time baseball team, as we say, played college football and pro baseball. He was born in 1917. He died in 1975 at the age of 58. We'd like Bob Melendek to come forward. Bob, a unique individual, was Joe, your brother. He played against Loyola, he played for them, and coached against them. We'd like to accept this gift on his behalf. From Joe Melendek, Bob Melendek. And Bill Dick and John Melendek also with us in the audience tonight. Now representing Coach Bob Nowaski. This is Calvert Hall, 1951 to 53. His son Bob Jr. We'd like Bob Jr. to come on up here. And remind you a little bit of his dad. Bob Jr. played for Coach Maselli in 1980. Calvert Hall was introduced to Nowaski by John Sanborn, the beloved longtime trainer there. He was an All-American football player at George Washington, and he played for the Chicago Bears for several years, including the 73-0 rout of the Redskins in 1940. He was in the Navy. We love it. He served in the Navy as a lieutenant in World War II. And he later played for the Dons, was assistant coach, that's the Los Angeles Dons, and assistant coach with the Chicago Cardinals. Bob Nowaski died actually doing a work of mercy. He was helping somebody change a tire, as I recall, and passed away prematurely in 1971. Bob Nowaski Jr. would like to accept this gift to commemorate the service, his playing days for Coach Maselli, and the undefeated 1979 team on which you played. Bob Nowaski. He looks like his dad. He really does. Now, representing Coach Tom Carr. Coach Carr was with the club in 1959 at Calvert Hall. His son Jim Carr is with us tonight. Came over from Washington. Tom Carr died very prematurely, only 47 when he died in 1975. He grew up in Shamokin, Pennsylvania, in the coal regions. Served 2 years in the Army as a first sergeant. Went to East Stroudsburg State. Became familiar with Calvert Hall while coaching at Delone up in Hanover, and his coaching career took him to Lebanon Valley, Delone Catholic, Calvert Hall, on the semi-pro level. Coach Carr had 4 children who were spread around Toledo, Pittsburgh, and Maryland. We'd like Jim Carr to come up and thank him for being with us tonight. Jim Carr. Before we introduce the head coaches who are with us, and we'll have a few words to say tonight, we want to say thanks to Henry Walford. Henry's tireless efforts located all of these coaches' relatives. It was really difficult to do that because many of them have been around for many, many years in this area. Tom Bacon said he had no trouble finding some of the living coaches, but he had no idea where to search for relatives since these men aren't listed in the directory. So Henry Walford and Tom Bateman, again, our thanks. We'd like you to stand up and take a bow. Henry Walford. All right, Tom, you pick it up down.
All right, Vince. A couple of other people, I'd just like to say, acknowledge out here in the audience, Jerry Gray, who was an assistant for Fred Kern in 1963. Jerry Gray over here in the corner. And to John Carroll High, later after leaving Calvert Hall, a fabulous job. Also, the oldest Calvert Hall grad here tonight, Al Klug, from the 1925 team. From Gopinstown. Also from the 1928 team, Frank Grunder. Frank. And the youngest alumnus here is Sean Mackley from 1992. Where's Sean? Sean? Is that him right here? Okay. Our first coach to present to you is a man who's starred at Calvert Hall in football, baseball, basketball, and soccer. Nick Bircher played from 1923 to 1927 and coached the Cardinals from 30 to 34. He was the unknown distinction as being responsible for starting soccer at the school. When Nick Bircher Red Wing played for Dutch Lentz, he was paving the way for the beginnings of our soccer program as soccer did not exist. So when football season was finished in the fall, he proceeded to be a player coach for soccer, which back then was played in the winter. Nick's senior yearbook pictures declared that he was one of the best all-around athletes in Maryland in 4 sports. In 1933, as a coach, he had won state and Catholic championships in football, 3 times in basketball, and 3 times in baseball. 7 championships in 4 years, and 2 undefeated teams, 1932 and 34. Last words written about him in the 35 yearbook were, during his years of coaching, Nick has always maintained a spirit of fair play, and he has endeavored to impart it to all his charges. The yearbook concluded, well, so long, Nick, and good luck, and maybe the God of coaches gives you an abundance of good material and the cooperation of the faculty and the students. 60 years later, in 1995, Nick has not left, and neither have we left you. Understand the devotion that his players had for him. And Joe Corby, who as escorting coach here tonight, was asked if he would bring his former coach to the dinner. Mr. Corby told us, I'll take Coach Bircher anywhere he wants to go. Would you please step up to the microphone here, Nick Bircher.
Well, I think I'm the oldest one here. I coached from 1930 to 1936. And the first 4 years I coached 7 state championships, which wasn't bad for me. But I think we had the best team in 32 or 33. We beat a fellow named Paul Brown. I think he was the best coach that ever coached in Maryland. He had won 22 straight games, and we beat him. And I'm more proud of that than beating Loyola 32-6.
Thank you very much. Television, when you see script this big, it's usually for what they call a teleprompter. You know, if you see the news anchors looking right into the lens, and actually sounding like they know what they're talking about. Basically, they're reading a script that's been typed out. You just read it right straight through, and it looks like you're knowledgeable. But Mr. Corby, would you please come up here to the speaker's podium? We have a surprise for you, sir. Joe Corby played for Coach Bircher, and he went to Calvert Hall for 4 years. In 1930, just as graduation came, Joe was told that he would have to leave. He had not taken all the courses required. He had missed a half-credit course and therefore could not graduate from Calvert Hall. So after taking the courses that his counselor signed him up for, he was without a diploma. Tonight, we're going to fix that. Brother Kevin, come on up. We're going to get your diploma a little late. Better late than never, right?
Is it tuition paid up?
Mr. Corby is a great friend of mine, and he has done a lot for the school. And although we do not have the diploma, it is ordered that he's going to receive this at a special affair, which will come later. But we do want to congratulate him for finally getting his Calvert Hall diploma, and thanks very much for all that you do for Calvert Hall.
I've been there before. Congratulations. Thank you for coming up. Better late than never, right? Well, over the years, you know, I worked with Vince Bagley for a long time back in the early 70s, and he broke me into the business. And one of the first people that he introduced me to was a man that's sitting alongside me down this head table here. And I'd like to be introducing him, but I think it's probably a situation where Vince and this gentleman have been probably as close of friends as you could possibly have here in Baltimore. So I'm going to turn it over to Vince for a loyal introduction of a Calvert Hall man. Vince?
Thank you, Tom. First of all, I'll introduce a couple of fellows who made it pretty good through Calvert Hall and then went on to do big things in the NFL. One of the great defensive ends in football. I remember talking to Wyatt Till one time, and he said that he was at a particular time in his career as good a defensive end as there was. He went to the University of Virginia after playing at Calvert Hall. He was involved in the famous game when they beat Loyola 13-0 in 1948. And he played for the New York Giants, the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm talking about Tom Scott. Tom Scott. And another Red Bird who did a good job. I think it was 8 years with the St. Louis Cardinals, the football Cardinals in St. Louis before they moved to Arizona. Then he moved to the Jets, where he was the center and also snapped the ball and blocked for Joe Namath. Wayne Mulligan. Wayne Mulligan. Members of the Maryland Athletic Hall of Fame. Hall of Famers with us tonight, no doubt about it. I'm thinking to introduce one right now who is one of the most famous of all Calvert Hall graduates. Calvert Hall graduate in 1948, played a couple of years there, went on to Bucknell where he became a Little All-America tackle, drafted by the Dallas Texans. He played with that club briefly in the era of Art Donovan and Sisto Averno and other original Colts. Went into teaching and coaching. Coached at Calvert Hall, coached at City College for many years, had many MSA champions. While studying football, he was also studying history, has 2 master's degrees in that subject. Was recognized as a great knowledgeable football man by Don Shula, then the coach of the Miami Dolphins. Brought him to Miami, a very organized person, a fellow who's immensely loyal. A personal note about him, I don't think I've ever met anybody in sports more loyal than this man I want to introduce right now. Whenever he comes to Baltimore, he calls his friends, he calls you on the phone. If anybody's having any trouble, he's first there by your side or on that telephone. So I'd like to introduce now the 4-time Executive of the Year in the National Football League, twice the National Football League champion with the New York Giants. The Giants general manager, one of Calvert Hall's great people, George Young.
I think it goes with the spirit of the night that I'd be introduced by someone from Loyola. I really mean that sincerely. This is a wonderful affair. You know, we live in a strange world nowadays, and I think the word sportsmanship is lost in antiquity somewhere, that nobody seems to appreciate it. And this kind of a gathering reaffirms the fact that it does exist, and maybe it's just on the high school level. I hope it's a little further up, and it really is impressive that, you know, to have such a wonderful affair. I was thinking of Nick Bircher, who played with my father here in Calvert Hall, and I was very, you know, it touched me very much when Ronnie Barr introduced his father, who was my coach at Calvert Hall, and all of Joe Mellendick's brothers, I think, are here, or coached me at Calvert Hall, and even Dutch Lynch, his son and grandson, are here, and he coached my father at Calvert Hall, and you just don't have an opportunity in life to live through this, and this is what this evening means to me, and I'm very, very impressed with it. Even when Nick Bircher was talking about Paul Brown, in the last year of his life, I spent with him in Hawaii. We were at a competition committee meeting, and I was up early in the morning, and we're sitting there next to the ocean, and Paul is talking to me, and he's 83, 4, whatever he was then, and he's talking about his time in the MSA and at the Severn School in 1930 and 31, and how happy he was in those days. And he asked me something, he looked me right in the eye, and he says, "Do you remember a guy named Herbie Armstrong?" And I said, "Yeah, I knew him well, but I never call him Herbie. I always call him Mr. Armstrong." But he was Paul's dearest friend in the MSA, and here he's in his 80s, and we're talking about all kinds of other kind of things. And when I told him that I knew Herb Armstrong, and he just lit up the rest of the day, he said later on in the day, he said, "Did you really know Herbie Armstrong?" So I said, these kind of things are so important. I really appreciate, I can't name all my former players that are here, and the coaches and all of the people. It's just the event, the Calvert Hall Loyola game, I hope to attend this year, and I am looking forward to it. I won't tell anybody too much, but I did see Loyola play St. John's this year. You know, you get tired of looking at what I have to look at. And I still appreciate a high school game. I went and saw Bergen Catholic play against St. Joe's Regional, which is where I live, and they have one of the best teams in the country. They're rated about 5th. They're the Irish Christian Brothers. I always remind them up there I was taught by the French Christian Brothers. They've overrun the community up there. I'd like to tell you one little story, because I think it's very fitting. And Brother Rene, who I spoke with in LaSalle, Christian Brothers got me 2 nights in a row. They got me up in Philadelphia, and then they got me here. But I will like to tell this little story, because when you look in the room and you look at all you people, this is one of the most apropos things. It was something that I found in Ann Landers. It seems that a woman wrote this to Ann Landers after reading all of these stories of the macho men and all that stuff in there, but I think that some of you can take this to heart, even the younger fellas. It seems that when the good Lord was making the world, He called man aside and bestowed upon him 20 years of normal sex life. Man was horrified, but the Creator refused to budge. Then the Lord called the monkey and gave him 20 years. "But I don't need 20 years," said the monkey. 10 years is plenty. Man spoke up and said, "May I have the other 10? The monkey agreed. The Lord called on the line, also gave him 20 years. The line too wanted only 10. Again man spoke up, may I have the other 10? Of course, said the line. Then came the donkey, who was also given 20 years. Like the others, 10 years was enough. Man again asked for the spare 10, and he got them. This explains why man has 20 years of a normal sex life, 10 years of monkeying around, 10 years of lying about it, and 10 years of making a jackass out of it. The woman that wrote this knew what she was talking about. I truly appreciate being here with all of you.
Another one of those profound Calvert Hall guys. We'd like to introduce one of the great quarterbacks to ever come out of the city. Ed Hargan picked him up. I remember when he first came in the game, the 1944 game, the first time we played in the stadium in 1944. Pat Corrigan is here tonight. He was in that game for Calvert Hall. Bobby Williams came into the game to replace Bob Knoppinger, who was as good a defensive end as I ever saw in high school. And anyway, Bob hurt his knee, and Bobby Williams, a sophomore, came into the game as an end for Loyola. He graduated a few years later as a top quarterback, taken to Notre Dame at South Bend. He was on the national championship team in 1948 and 49. They were undefeated for many, many games in a row, and finally in his senior season, they finally did lose. He came back to Baltimore after a 3-year career with the Chicago Bears, where he'd been the #1 draft choice for George Halas, breaking in at the time Bobby Lane and people like that. George Blanda were young quarterbacks. Came back to Baltimore, has been in the banking business, and a fellow who sponsors the baseball team that is the kind of the forerunner to the Johnny's team that is perennially the best sandlot team in the country. He has the 14-16 team. Harbor Federal is the name of the bank, and that's the name of the team. I was at a banquet with him a couple of weeks ago. Let's introduce number 9 from Notre Dame, former Loyola quarterback, Bobby Williams.
Thanks, Vince. The only thing he didn't add is the first time I got in the game, in the Calvert Hall game in 1944, as Vince mentioned, I was an end, and I was looking into the eyes of the guy who you just heard from a few minutes ago, and the first thing he looked at me and he said, "Which way do you want to go, kid?" When discussions arise about Loyola High School and related football and basketball in our area, the conversation always revolves around our coach, Ed Hargan. Ed was and still is an institution in itself at Loyola. Biographically speaking, Ed came to Loyola in 1942 as a football and basketball coach. According to one of his players that first fall, Ed almost gave up because most of his team was not interested in practice, but only partying after the games. If I'm not mistaken, John LeBrew, and I'm sure I'm not mistaken now, ran wild that year as Calvert Hall beat Loyola. He hurried that season along to get on with basketball because, remember, he had Jim Lacey waiting for him. Ed's era at Loyola continued until 1956, during which time he had 4 MSA championships, the first undefeated season at Loyola in '44, state champs in 1943, went to New Orleans a couple years later, playing in the Sugar Bowl, and all was good, solid football teams year in and year out until 1956, his last year. Let me back up a bit and give you a few insights about Ed Hargan and the coach. During my 3 years on the team, they took us away for preseason football camp. The first was Tread Avenue near Oxford, Maryland. We stayed in deserted chicken houses, practiced in what was a former pasture, and worked twice a day, 7 days a week for an interminable period. I quickly learned about Ed's work ethic. I was a sophomore in at the time and took a daily pounding from 2 All-Staters, Bob Knoppinger and Lou Eckerl, both of whom are here this evening.
They had us walk to morning mass and 3 meals a day up to the main house a mile away. That was sort of to get you tough. Then Bellarmine Hall on top of the mountain near Camp David. Laps up and down the mountain. Ed hated to waste time, so he got most of the football players out after dinner to practice a little half-court basketball. Bill Goodrow was a quarterback, and he was telling me about the Calvert Hall game in 1948. Hargadon was so mad that he wouldn't speak to him for 10 years. Hargadon got wind of a bunch of players going out the night before the game and thought Goodrow was the ringleader. The real story was that Calvert Hall had scouted Loyola and knew that they would do certain things when Goodrow lined up a certain way. Bill said he got a suntan, he was looking at the sky so much. The mark of good practice was how many had blood on them after practice was over, as far as Ed was concerned. Joe Brune said it best, that Hargadon coached pride and intimidation. He was the master at encouraging aggressiveness. Ask anyone who played for Ed Hargadon, and they'll tell you he taught valuable lessons in being a team player, getting up after being knocked down, being the best you can be, and most importantly, self-discipline. Ed died in 1986 at 75. His spirit remains at Loyola, and I'm proud to say he was my coach, teacher, and friend. Thank you.
We wanted to have Ed Jr. here tonight. Ed Jr., Ed Hargadon Jr., played on a championship team in 1955. And he is in Bradenton, Florida, where he has just accepted a new position. He's the director of the Bureau of Purchasing for the city of Bradenton, and he tried to come, but he wasn't able to make it. But he did send me a fax, and I want you to bear with me while I read you a few lines from the fax. This is from Ed Hargadon Jr. For about 15 years, he was in the Loyola dressing room as a young player, a young boy, a kid. He was a ball boy. I can remember that, a player, and then an alumnus. Remember something that is as true today as it was as you celebrate your dinner. It's as true today as it was then. Before the game in the dressing room, the great coach, meaning his father, would gather the players together, and after a few quick comments about the game plan, he would get deadly serious and address the seniors playing their last game. Boys, he would say, there's only one thing I wish for you today. I wish that when the game is over, that you can walk off this field with pleasant memories. Then the coach went on to explain what pleasant memories meant. Holding nothing back, playing like down to your last breath, if your last breath of air depended on it, trying to perform things that you never dreamed could happen. And he promised that if you did that, even though you won or lost the game, if you had the pleasant memories of the best effort you could put forward, you'd be happy with yourself. He said, Ed writes, I was lucky to play on a strong Loyola team that was fortunate to beat a very tough Calvert Hall squad and enable us to win the MSA championship. In the locker room immediately after the game, with all the excitement, the emotion of it all hit me. All I could do was quietly slip into the men's room, lock myself into a stall where I wept quietly. I knew I would have pleasant memories, but I also knew that it was over. I would never again be able to wear a Loyola football uniform again, only in my memories. And Eddie Hargadon Jr. wishes the same thing for the boys who play in this Thursday's game. Play your heart out for your school, your coach, your teammates, but play it for yourself as well so that you will have pleasant memories. He thanks us for thinking about him and remembering his great father on this occasion. Pleasant memories to all from Ed Hargadon Jr. Thank you.
All right, Vince, very well done. Dave Parr's been sitting next to me for the entire evening here, and when I arrived at Calvert Hall in '62, he was the football coach, and little did I know that would be his last year as the coach. He coached from 1960 through 1962. He was an assistant coach in '59, and he went to Calvert Hall from '50 to '53. He has the distinction of being voted the greatest halfback to ever come out of Calvert Hall. Dave Shannon, a Calvert Hall teacher and former coach, said that he played against Dave at St. John's, and that Dave single-handedly beat them. He started all 4 years, and as a freshman scored a touchdown against Loyal. Each yearbook cites Dave Parr scoring on long touchdown runs. Dave went to Villanova, served in the Army, and currently resides in Chicago, where he owns his own marketing company. May I present to you coach for Calvert Hall back in the early 60s, Dave Parr.
This is quite an auspicious occasion for me and Reverend's brothers and fathers, gentlemen, distinguished guests. I've come here to tell you a story. I've come here to pay an obligation back, which I should have done many, many years ago. The story is about a young man, sort of a dumb kid, by the name of David Parr, who entered Calvert Hall in 1950. It was kind of inevitable that I would go there, simply because my father had gone to Calvert Hall, and I was the boat boy for a fellow by the name of Father Henry Brianzo, who was the chaplain at Calvert Hall when Brother Gabriel was then principal. So it seemed almost inevitable that I did wind up there. It was the greatest thrill of my life to be able to go to this institution. I entered that institution in 1950, and through the kindness of Brother Gabriel, he worked out some sort of arrangement where we paid $4 a month or $4 a year in tuition. And while doing that, this great man also founded the new Calvert Hall and found enough money and contributors to build that marvelous institution that's across the way. Anyway, I went to Calvert Hall in 1950, and I immediately entered the school on the ramp. And if any of you have ever seen old Calvert Hall, it was a 5-story structure down at Cathedral in Mulberry, and of course the freshmen were housed on the top floor. And to get to the top floor, it took you 10 minutes to get there. When you're there, you're out of breath, and of course that's the way the Christian Brothers wanted you, because you couldn't say anything back to them. I entered the ramp, and I knew it was the ramp because there was a halo of blue smoke above it. That was the only place that the upperclassmen could smoke their cigarettes. And it was the only gracious token that you got from the Christian Brothers, because we had a campi which was 50 yards of concrete one way and 100 yards of concrete another way. That was the campus of Calvert Hall. I entered that gate, and the first thing that I beheld was a senior classman who came up to me and asked me, "Hey kid, where are you going?" I said, "I'm trying to find Brother D. Andrews' class." He said, "Well, that's up on the 5th floor of this building. But I got your problem solved." He said, "I have an elevator ticket in my pocket, and since I'm a senior, I'm going to sell that ticket to you." You thought there was dummies there at Calvert Hall? Well, let me tell you, they still exist, and they are there today. I bought that elevator ticket, and with that, the first bell rang. So off I went to the senior classman. I said, "Well, where's the elevator? I got to get up to the top floor." He said, "I'll show you where it is." And he took me over these beautiful green doors. He opened the door and threw me in, and I went into the garbage pit. The second bell rang. I was reeked in garbage. I ran up the stairs and got to the very top floor, the 5th floor of this building. And what to my wondrous eye appeared but Brother Paul. Brother Paul was 6'12", weighed 400 pounds, and never spoke a word other than a shout. He said, "Hey kid, where are you going?" I told him I was going to see Brother Andrew. He said, "Wonderful." He whacked me in the back of the head, drove me into Brother Andrew's arms at the door, and Brother Andrew saw me and said, "You're terribly disheveled." I said, "You're right, brother." I said, "I've been here for 15 minutes. I've been swindled, thrown into a garbage pit, and now personally assaulted." He said, "Don't worry, you're home. Sit down and relax." I sat down, and he instantly went to the front of the classroom, rolled up his sleeves of his cassock, and I saw these great big forearms appear. And this man had the greatest forearms I've ever seen in my life. And you didn't think I was going to tangle with that after I'd been so abused for the first 15 minutes. I had the world's record at Calvert Hall for doing the dumbest things. And he knew that. The day progressed, and Sure enough, Brother Andrew became my fast friend. He cleared the way for me, and at that time he said, "Hey kid, why don't you go out for football?" I said, "Marvelous, brother, what do I do?" He says, "Well, come down and get some equipment." We went downstairs, we got the equipment. He handed me a pair of hip pads, and of course I had an 18-inch waist. He gave me a 42-inch hip pad, and instead of having the hips, they were a cup and a fanny pack. Everything else seemed to fit pretty well except the headgear. The headgear, which I wore all 4 years that I was there, I never had to take off. It had 4 inches in the front, and I could wipe my brow by dropping a towel up between my forehead and the headgear. It was a marvelous situation, and I loved every moment of it. Brother Andrew gave me the equipment. I said, "Where do we play? Where can I walk to this?" He said, "We're at Walbrook Oval." I said, "Marvelous. How do I get there?" He sat down in this beautiful Palmer hand, and if you've ever seen Brother Andrew write, he should have been called Brother Palmer, because he writes the most beautiful notes that you have ever seen. But nevertheless, Brother Andrew wrote me a dissertation, a 4-page dissertation on how to get to Walbrook Oval. 2 streetcars later, and a bus, and a 5-block walk, I found the illustrious Walbrook Oval. Had a swamp at one end, and if you're fortunate enough to make a post out, you may go in the swamp and never return again. Corky Hargis used to be my locker mate somewhere along the line, and one day, because we couldn't take our whites home to have them washed, he pulled out a t-shirt, and when it hit the air, it disintegrated instantly. Nevertheless, I came out for practice, and I only had a pair of tennis shoes on. And with that, and I'm glad the Melendicks are here tonight, because part of the story goes along with them. I walked out on the field, and Joe Mellendick walked over to me and said, "You can't play in those tennis shoes. Somebody's going to cripple you for life." And I said, "What am I going to do?" He says, "You better get a pair of shoes." So I went home that night, and I rooted around, and my mother said, "Well, you know, I think there's a pair of shoes in the box down the basement." I went down, pulled the shoes out, and sure enough, there was a pair of football shoes. I'd never seen them before. Took them to practice the next day, walked out there, and I discovered that the shoes were a size 17. My foot was 9. I stumbled around the field, and I saw Brother Andrew, this marvelous eagle in the sky, talking to Joe Mellendick. And Joe and he conversed a little bit, and Joe said, "Come here, boy." I said, "What is it, sir?" He says, "Take your shoes off." I said, "I beg your pardon? You just told me to get a pair." She said, "Take your shoes off." I sat down on the ground, took my shoes off, and he sat down on the ground and took his shoes off. And this man, and I'm sure through the orchestration of Brother Andrew, gave me his shoes. I couldn't afford a pair of shoes because my dad was terribly ill at the time, and nevertheless, that was the first act of charity which I really received in my life, orchestrated through this man, Brother Andrew, who I call the eagle in the sky. It was a marvelous occasion for me, and as football progressed and what have you, I found myself at the end of that first year in the Baltimore Stadium locker room. I was sitting there, and I came over kind of early because I only lived 2 doors away. And into the locker room door came Brother Andrew. And Brother Andrew in his Stetson hat and his Sunday go-to-meeting clothes was absolutely and positively beautiful. It appeared as he stepped out of a bandbox. And he looked down at me and said, "How you doing?" I said, "Fine." He said to me, "Give me your shoes." I said, "I beg your pardon?" He said, "Give me your shoes." I said, "What are you going to do?" And with that, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a cleat, and here in his Sunday go-to-meeting clothes, he took these muddy cleats and changed them and put on the new cleats. I said, "What are you doing, brother?" He said, "I'm helping you win this ball game. You think about the ball game." I said, "Brother, I'm not going to play in this ball game." He said, "We'll see." Halfway through the second half, my God, they called my name, and Joe Mellendick sent me into the game, and I hopefully rewarded them a little bit because those shoes carried me across the goal line. And I think Brother Andrew felt a little stronger about it, the fact that he did, as that eagle in the sky brought me across that finish line. Anyway, life went on, and I got to know Brother Andrew a little bit better, and I went out for hockey. And as I played hockey, I found out that you had to find a pair of ice skates. I went to that proverbial box, found a pair of ice skates, and actually fit this time. Went out on the rink, stumbled around, and lo and behold, I couldn't skate. And Brother Andrew once again took me off of the ice, took me over, had the skates redone, and I could then skate. Halfway through that season, however, the skates fell apart. He called me over again, took me into the sports arena there, and out of his own pocket, spent $15 and bought me a pair of ice skates. A year later, this Eagle, who was standing on the sidelines at the Patterson Park game, and Patterson Park was the enemy of the year, and we happened to tie that game, at which time there were 2 touchdowns scored by those very shoes. And the end result was that Brother Andrew presented me with that football, and I cherish it to this day. Life went on a little bit. We won the several MSCA championships, and the end result was that every game and every championship that we won, Brother Andrew gave me a hockey puck. Well, I came here to tell that story, perhaps not about me, but that great eagle in the sky. That great eagle in the sky was Brother Andrew. And Brother Andrew paved the way for me on almost every occasion where I ran up against the barricade. He is truly what I would consider the man that I wish to emulate in my lifetime. He is the finest man that I have ever known.
When I was in Calvert Hall from 62 to 66, I can remember